Thank you for that very generous introduction. So generous that I think the first thing we should do is let's all lower our expectations. Okay? I do well in a room of lowered expectations. I am here today to talk to you about storytelling. And can we get that monitor on? Is that possible? Because there's nothing on that monitor, if possible. And before I go any further, I want to ask you a question. How often are you telling stories as part of your work? I'm curious right now how much you're using stories. I want to take the temperature of this room. So I'm going to give you 4 choices. Take a look at the 4 choices, and then I'm going to ask you to raise your hands. So your first choice is rarely or never. You're just not doing it. And if that's where you're at, that's fine. I just want you to be honest. Your second choice is occasionally. You're story curious. Maybe you experimented with it in college. I don't know. Your third choice is frequently. You really are someone who tells story on a pretty regular basis. And your fourth choice is all the time. And you're thinking, do I even have to stay for this talk? So, given those choices, I'm going to do this because the lights are in my eyes, how many people right now would say rarely or never, just not doing it? Anybody? I see no hands. Okay, good. How about occasionally? Just occasionally. I see a few hands. Okay. Frequently. Wow. Okay, that's good. And all the time. All right, good. Well, the other reason I do this is that my goal today in the roughly hour I have with you is, by the time I'm done, I would like every single person in this room to leave this room thinking, I have to be in the all the time category. That this tool is too powerful, my work is too valuable for me not to be using it. So that's what I'm going for. And for me, I believe that stories are the single most powerful communications tool you have available to you, bar none. And for me, it's been a lifelong journey to that belief. So I'd like to share with you my entire life story, from birth to this minute. But since we don't have all day, I've compressed it into 3 minutes. But I want you to know where I'm coming from, literally. This is where I grew up, White Plains, New York. Now, yay, go Tigers. Now let me show you where I really grew up. There, in front of the television. I spent so much time planted in front of the television as a child that I think that this planted in my mind the idea, wouldn't it be fun to write for television for a living? So my dream growing up in White Plains, New York, was to be a TV writer. I wanted to write sitcoms. Well, in 1991, I picked up the family, then living in Connecticut, moved across the country to Hollywood, and I actually got a job. I got a job writing for network television. Now, this was more than 20 years ago, and this being a room full of intelligent, thoughtful, caring adults, you probably never saw this show, but just for the record, worked on a show called Dinosaurs. Oh, sure, now. Where were you 20 years ago? Funny thing about this show, this was a Walt Disney, Jim Henson co-production. A lot of very creative people working the show. And we, the writers, thought that we were writing this very witty, trenchant social satire, using dinosaurs to mock human foibles. But 20 years later, when I meet people who remember the show, the only thing they remember, the only thing, is that the baby dinosaur used to refer to its mother as Mama and used to refer to its father as... I am ashamed of you. For those of you who don't remember, here's a clip.
Want to give Daddy your keys?
Not the mama, not the mama, not the mama, not the mama, not the mama.
That is starting to bother me.
Like I said, witty, trenchant social satire. So I worked on this show for 3 seasons. It was a fun, creative environment, just a great place to work. This was the first TV show I worked on. This was the last TV show I worked on. Anybody remember this show? Really? Really? This was not a fun creative environment. I was on Dinosaurs for 3 years. I was on this show for 3 weeks because it was a swirling, sucking vortex of despair. Literally drove me out of the TV business. But that was a good thing because I made a big left turn in my career and I went to work for a nonprofit called the Environmental Media Association, or EMA. It was started by Norman Lear and some of his friends with the express purpose of being the nexus between the environmental community with all its important messages it needed to get out and the entertainment industry with its huge megaphone. And specifically, our strategy was to work with writers and producers of TV shows and movies, trying to convince them to put environmental messages into their storylines. So the idea being you're sitting at home watching your favorite primetime show, and all of a sudden the characters are talking about recycling or global warming or what have you. So I ran this organization for 5 years, and that got me into the nonprofit world, where I started to meet lots of nice people like you. And when I would meet people at nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, people working to make the world a better place, at conferences often like this, and I would say, so where do you work? What do you do? These people would start talking, and out of their mouths would come the mission statements, and the bullet points, and the acronyms, and the factoids, and the blah, blah, blah. And after 30 or 40 seconds, I would realize, I have no idea what you do for a living. Please stop talking. And so I thought, I need to start my own company with the express purpose of helping people at good causes communicate more clearly. And so I did in 1998, and that's what I've been doing ever since. But what gets us to this topic of storytelling is this. After just a year or two in business, I started to realize that when I would pick up the phone, I was getting the same call over and over again. Someone at the other end would say something to me like this. And so naturally I would say, well, so what is it that you do? And then they would say something to me like this. Right? And I'd say, okay, I'm a college graduate. I understand what you just said, but I can't say I'm getting a picture. I can't say my heart just started racing listening to that. So can you just tell me a story about one child that you helped, one family, one community? I'm all ears. Tell me a story. And then they would say something to me like this. And this was troubling to me, because here I was talking to the leadership. Might have been the ED, someone who ran a program, a board member, a trustee. These were people who were literally the ambassadors for their organizations, going into the outside world every day to talk about what they did for a living, and these good people could not tell me a good story. Not one. And if you could have been in my office in Los Angeles with me, watching me on the phone, talking to them, and you could have seen the thought bubble forming over my head while I was talking to them, it would have looked something like that. So I thought, I need to study this thing called storytelling, because here's this incredibly powerful tool, and we're not using it. And so I started to read every book I could get my hands on, all the research, all the case studies about how our minds process narrative as opposed to data, how we take in stories as opposed to facts. And the deeper I went, the deeper it went, until I came to the conclusion that this is it. This is the single most powerful tool that we have, and we're not using it to the fullest extent. And so for the last 15 years or so, I've been traveling around the country and really around the world, working with nonprofits of all stripes, these groups and more, colleges and universities, government agencies, associations, and other bodies, helping them figure out what stories should we tell and how can we tell them more effectively. And what has come back to me over the years, they said, you know what? When we finally figured out what our stories were and started telling them, it didn't just improve our communications, it transformed our communications. And that's what I'd like to see happen to you. If you are not telling stories consciously, consistently, deliberately, as part of your work, I'd like today to be the day that you change. That you leave here and decide, we're going to become a storytelling culture. So that's my story, from White Plains all the way to beautiful San Diego to be with you today. Now let me tell you our story in the short time we have together. We're going to do three things. First, I say to you that narrative is the most powerful form of communication. I don't expect you to take it on faith. You are critical thinkers here. So I want to present you some of the research. Now, I wish I could show you all the research I've seen over the years. It's compelling. We don't have the time. So I've picked 3 studies which I think are the most interesting. Hopefully by the end of that, you'll be nodding your head going, okay, maybe more here than I thought. So that'll take us to part 2, which is, how do I tell a good story? How do I tell the kind of story that when people hear it, they like it, remember it, and want to retell it? And that's the ball game. When you have people telling your stories for you, then you have the world's oldest form of social media on your side. And lastly, we'll talk about the kinds of stories you should tell. I visited a lot of the websites of a lot of the organizations in the room today, if you have a website, and looked at how you talk about what you do. There are tremendous opportunities for storytelling that you don't seem to be taking advantage of, so I'm going to show you some examples of what you could be doing. So that's what we're going to do. Ready? So first, why is narrative so powerful? First, stories help us remember. And that's critical. If you don't remember, if someone tells you something you don't remember, it's gone, right? So the fact that stories help us remember is critical. And this was illustrated in a study done in 1976 with 5-year-olds. And to tell you about this study, I actually need some help. Does anybody here have in their life now a 5-year-old, son, daughter, niece, nephew, right here in the gold sweater? 5-year-old son, daughter? Daughter, her name? Emily. Okay, good. And is she in like preschool or kindergarten? Kindergarten, okay. So imagine one day a nice researcher lady like her goes into Emily's kindergarten class and says, gather around, kids. I want to play a game with you. I want to test your memories, okay? And so Emily and her friends gather around. She says, I'm going to hold up cards like you see here that have 2 panels. And there are going to be pictures of things on these cards, like soap and shoe. And Emily, I want you to remember this pair, soap and shoe. Got it? Everybody, soap and shoe. Got it? And then she holds up another card, cloud and baseball bat. Remember that pair, cloud and bat. Good. Cow and paint. And she holds up 21 cards. Yeah, 21 pairs. And she asks Emily and her friends to try and remember those pairs as best they can. And after they see all 21 pairs, she says, okay, let's take a break, kids, because I know, that's exhausting. Go out into the playground and play for an hour. Yeah. 1 hour later, she brings them back. And then she holds up the cards again, except in these cards, one thing is missing. And she asks the kids to tell her what's missing. In other words, 1 hour later, 21 pairs, how many can the kids reconstruct? So this question is for Emily's mom. 1 hour later, out of 21 pairs, how many do you think Emily and her friends, on average, could put back together? Maybe 5. That would actually make them geniuses. And maybe Emily is, I don't know. But in a room full of normal children, it was 1. And actually, most parents of 5-year-olds will say 1 or 0, or would they even remember they saw the cards, They're 5, okay? Now, that's only test number 1. We're going to go to another school on another day. How about on this side of the room, another 5-year-old? It's okay if they're 6 or 7 now, where they were 5 at one time. Someone certainly must have a 5-year-old. Over there, yes, in the white. Name? Miranda? Okay, that's her name, right? Not yours. Okay, Miranda. So we go into Miranda's class, all right? Almost the exact same setup, but one key difference. In this setup, we say to the kids, we're going to show you pairs, but as we show you each pair, we would like one of you to put it in a sentence for the whole class to hear. So you're going to be 5-year-old Miranda. Miranda, please put the words soap and shoe in a sentence for the whole class to hear anytime you're ready. It's okay, she's only 5. Come on. Soap and shoe in a sentence. I used the soap on my shoe this morning. Perfect. I used the soap on my shoe this morning. 21 sentences. Kids go out and play for an hour, bring them back and test them. Compared to the first group, compared to Emily's group, how do you think Miranda's group did? Same, better, or worse? Better. So if the first group did 1, Miranda's group remembered 8. Okay? Now, one more school, one more day. We're going to go this side of the room. I need one more 5-year-old. One parent, right there. I see your hand. Go ahead. The name of the child? Sylvia. We go into Sylvia's class. Very similar setup, but the difference this time, put the words in a sentence that asks a question. So you'll be 5-year-old Sylvia. Sylvia, please put the words soap and shoe in a sentence that asks a question for the whole class to hear whenever you're ready. In case you didn't hear that, what if I put the soap inside my shoe and tried to put it on? Is that really a question? I guess it is. What if I put the soap inside my shoe and tried to put it on? Okay. 21 questions. Kids go out and play for an hour. Compared to the first 2 groups, how do you think Sylvia's group did? Same, better, worse, in between? Yeah. 16 out of 21 pairs remembered. So look at these results side by side by side. And what do you think the researchers concluded was happening in these kids' brains by virtue of asking questions that was happening not so much when they heard sentences and almost not at all when you just gave them the pairs? What do you think was happening? Well, what was happening was that, first of all, when you hear a question, human beings instinctively answer that question. This is, by the way, why so much advertising asks questions. They know how our minds work. You know? You're driving down the highway, pass a billboard, says, "Wouldn't you like to be in Paris right now?" You're like, yes, I would. Yeah. So I asked a question about putting soap in my shoe. The kids started to answer the question. Sylvia would answer that, think, well, I put my foot in there, it gets all stuck, and they start to construct the rudiments of a story, where somebody is doing something to somebody else, and there's an outcome. So triggered by questions, these kids, their little minds started percolating. They went out in the playground, came back an hour later. They saw a picture of a shoe, and Sylvia sat there and thought, shoe. Oh, that's right. When I put my foot in, there was soap in the shoe. Soap! And she had the other half of the pair. And they did it 16 out of 21 times. So the takeaway from this study, and this is relevant to everybody in this room and every group I speak to, if you have some facts that you want people to remember, it is much more likely they'll remember those facts if they are contained within a story than if you just give them the facts. Stories help us remember. Second, stories influence our desire to give ourselves, our time, our money. And this was illustrated in a study done back in 2004 with the very memorable title, "The Impact of Learning About the Identifiable Addictive Effect on Sympathy." Forget the title, remember the study because it's fascinating. Here's what they did. They intercepted students walking down College Walk at 2 universities, Penn and Carnegie Mellon, and they said, "Excuse me, hi, we're doing a survey. We want to measure your attitudes towards technology, what you use, cell phones, laptops, fax machines, etc. If you'll come to this computer lab and just take this survey, it'll take you 10 minutes, we'll give you $5. Deal?" And these being college students, sweet. Okay. So they quickly round up about 125 kids. They come into this computer lab, sit down, and sure enough, mundane questions about using telephones and fax machines, etc. And it takes them 10 minutes, and when they're done, all done, someone comes up and hands them an envelope with 5 $1 bills. Great. But when they look inside the envelope, they notice that besides the 5 $1 bills, there's a letter. And the letter is from Save the Children. And the letter says, we're Save the Children. We're working to fight widespread hunger in Africa. You'll notice a collection box on the way out the door. Would you possibly give back some of these dollars you just got? And they don't expect you to give back for nothing. The letter makes a strong case. It says, I got to read here, did you know that 11 million people in Ethiopia need immediate assistance? 4 million Angolans have been forced to flee their homes. There's been a 42% drop in maize production in Zambia since 2000 as a result of drought. Strong statistical case, widespread hunger in Africa, won't you please give? And sure enough, on the way out the door, some of the students take a few bucks, stick it in the donation box, do the right thing. But as the students get to the hallway, they notice across the hall a room set up exactly like the one they were in, with a bunch of kids at computers. And those kids are also coming out holding envelopes. Oh, did you just take the survey? Yeah. They gave you $5, right? And you got that letter from Save the Children? Yeah. With all those numbers? No. I'm sorry? They said, we got a letter from Save the Children, but look, our letter had a picture in it, like this. And let me read you what the letter says. It says, this is Rokia, a 7-year-old girl from Mali, Africa. She is desperately poor and faces a threat of severe hunger or even starvation. Her life will be changed for the better as a result of your financial gift. With your support and the support of other caring sponsors, Save the Children will, and it goes on to enumerate all the good things they'll do for Rokia, her family, and thousands of others. So you get the picture? 2 different rooms. One side gets a statistical case, one side gets a story. And what do you think happens on the way out the door? Right. Those who got the statistical case, wrong way, give back an average of $1.14. Those who got the story gave back more than twice as much. And we've seen this repeated with other issues, other variables, but every time the numbers tend to numb and the story tends to stick and move and people give. Stories make us give. I've saved the last study, I think I've saved the best for last, because this is the one I think is most important. Stories influence what we believe and what we act on every day. And this was illustrated in a study done in the 1980s by Professor Richard Nisbet at the University of Michigan. And here's what he did. He took a room full of college students. Again, it was about 125 students. And he said, students, today we're going to talk about one thing and one thing only. Women on welfare in New York City. And the only thing the students had in common was that none of them had any direct experience or contact with women on welfare in New York City. They were as close to a clean slate as you're ever going to get. And I know there are no clean slates, but you know what I mean. He said, we're going to do 3 things. First, I want you to read a story about one woman on welfare in New York City. And the story is a true story. It had been excerpted from the New Yorker magazine. He had printed out copies. He hands them out to all the students. He says, I'll be quiet. You read the story, and then we'll talk about it. And the students sit and read. Now, since you don't have the story here, let me give you the highlights. The woman in the story, she moves to New York City when she's in her 30s, and she promptly goes on welfare. Doesn't try very hard to get a job, just collects that welfare check every month and spends it on luxuries and lottery tickets and expensive cuts of meat and things like that. She just works the system for 13 years and is what Ronald Reagan once called a welfare queen. That's what the story is, profile of a welfare queen. And there's more, but you got the picture, right? Okay. So after they read the story, he says, now, let me show you data. Actual statistics about women on welfare in New York City at the same time as this story. And the data paints a very different picture. The average woman on welfare is not on welfare 13 years, she's on welfare 2 years. The average woman is not working the system, she's not a welfare queen. Often, she's a single head of a household, struggling to feed herself and her family, trying to get off welfare as soon as possible, trying desperately to find a job. So the picture that the data paints is one of innocent victims of poverty. So he says, all right, everybody understand the data? He says, now I want to remind you that the story that you read was true, but it was, and he used this word, atypical. Atypical. The data, same period of time, and it's accurate. He says, okay, now last part. I have a survey for you to measure your attitudes towards women on welfare in New York City. The survey had about a dozen questions. Here was a typical question. And my question to you, when the surveys were collected and tabulated, where do you think the students' attitudes ended up? Closer to 1 or closer to 5? 1. Why? You're right, it was 1, but why? Look, I know it's a speech about storytelling. Come on. You gotta work a little harder than story. People, story. Well, you're right, but there's more to it than that. Here's what Professor Nisbet concluded. Here was a typical student in the class, but it could have been you, could have been me. And there's their brain. All this gray matter inside of our skull, when we're first born, it's raw processing power. It's like a hard drive with nothing on it. But here's the thing. As we live our lives, stories get inside our brains and they act like software, telling our brains what facts to let in and what facts to reject. So in this experiment, these students were fed a powerful piece of software. People on welfare are irresponsible. And it got inside their brains. And then they were presented with data that absolutely contradicted the story. 2 years, not 13. Hardworking citizens, not scofflaws. But the student said, what's the story? Oh yeah, it's welfare. People on welfare are irresponsible. You can cook the numbers any way you want. I believe the story. I felt it. Numbers, not so much. And this is how our minds work. And this is how your audience's minds work. This is true of everybody in this room. Anybody here who thinks you're different, you're not. I'll prove it to you. If you have ever been in this situation where you have been confronted with facts that prove you are dead wrong, often presented by your spouse, right? Dead wrong. And you have responded with this line. Well, that's not my experience, right? Then you know what I'm talking about. Each of us walks around a focus group of 1, right? What happens to us? That's the way the world works. So, and as we live our lives, we accumulate these experiences, these stories, and we filter everything through them. So now let me bring it home for you. Take a moment and think about the people you're trying to reach in your work right now. Not the people who are inside the tent on your side working with you. Not the people outside the tent so far away that they're never coming in. But I'm talking about the people who are kind of peeking in the tent, thinking, is this for me? What we sometimes refer to as the muddled middle. And here's my point. If these are the stories inside their head right now, no amount of data is going to change their minds. It's just not the way our minds work. So if you're in the business of changing the world for the better, and I think that's everybody in this room, you're first in the business of changing the stories in people's heads about the way the world works. That's where we begin. And I want to show you a classic example of this. We're going to leave the worldly environment for a second, but you'll get the point. Let's talk about organ donation. Show of hands, how many people here are organ donors? Can't see? Fantastic. If you get out in the world, unfortunately the numbers are not quite so high. There are a lot of people out there who don't want to donate organs, and they have very powerful stories in their heads about why they're not organ donors. In fact, if you look at the research, there are 4 very strong narratives that people have about why they don't want to donate their organs. Who can tell me any one of them? Raise your hand, I'll call on you. I know you know these. What are some of the reasons people don't want to donate organs? Yes, right there in, I think, the green. Right, they won't try as hard to save you, right? You're injured, you're in an accident, they see you're an organ donor. Take the long road to the hospital, okay, there? Ambulance driver. That's right. We're going to let this one go. Sorry, need the kidney. That's right. The hospital won't work as hard to save me. In the back, way in the back, something else. Cultural and religious beliefs, right. When I go to meet my maker, I need to be whole. All of me's got to be there. The others are, because of the lights I can't see you, the others are, I'm too old. A lot of people think they hit a certain age, they can't donate organs. Not true. And the one that surprised me is only rich people will get my organs. There's like this black market, it won't be fair. So here are the major narratives against organ donation. And this is true wherever you go. United States, go anywhere around the world, people are people, and this is what they worry about. So if you want to increase organ donor rates, and you say to these people, wait a second, don't you understand? There's a waiting list of 17,000 people for a kidney. We need yours. 200,000 people need a heart. 50,000 people need a cornea. Whatever. These people are going to go, sorry, I've got a story that works for me. So if you want to break through that, you have to give them a more powerful story. And I want to show you a wonderful example of how this was done. We're going to leave the United States. We're going to Brazil. To this town, which is pronounced, you see it there? It's pronounced Recife. And in Recife, there was an effort made to raise organ donor rates, like you would make in any city, but it was here in Recife. Now, whether you've been to Brazil or not, you may know that in Brazil, across the nation, and in every city, the people are crazy about something, mad about something. What are they mad about? Soccer, right. But it's actually called football over there, but yes, soccer. And in Recife, the local team is called Sport Club do Recife. People would die for this team. Wait a second, there's the thought. So if they would die for the team, would they donate their organs for the team? Well, they actually created an organ donor card branded with the logo of the team, but here's where it got brilliant. What they said was, if you die and you donate your organs to someone else, your fandom lives on forever. And they created a campaign called Immortal Fans. And the other spin on this, which is wonderful, they said, not only does your fandom live on forever, but if your organs go into someone else who was not a fan, they become a fan. Right? Can you imagine in the United States, like Yankee fans donating their organs to Red Sox fans? I mean, it boggles the mind. Anyway, this was hugely successful, and I want to show you a short video that captures that success. Take a look.
Amar, não tem comparação, torcida, não tem. O resto é resto, o esporte é tudo.
Primeiro Deus, segundo esporte, terceira família, quarto é trabalho.
Prometo que os seus olhos vão continuar assistindo o esporte.
Que os seus pulmões continuarão expirando pelo esporte.
Prometo que o seu coração sempre baterá pelo esporte.
Hoje a maior dificuldade que existe no processo de doação é o sim da família.
Eu sou rubro-negra até depois de morrer, irmão. Ter a alma é rubro-negra.
Ainda mais se quando eu doar meus órgãos, ou meu pulmão for pro cara do Náutico, torcedor do Náutico, ele vai respirar o esporte.
A campanha atingiu números impressionantes. 51 mil torcedores se declararam doadores, uma quantidade superior à capacidade da Ilha do Retiro.
A campanha do esporte, eu não tenho dúvida alguma que serviu para que, aumentando a oferta de doadores, a gente conseguisse zerar essa lista, conseguisse realizar transplante em todos que estavam precisando.
Uma campanha de doação de órgãos lançada pelo esporte está ajudando a salvar a vida de muitos torcedores.
Antes do vídeo, eu tinha passado 18 anos de diabético e 5 anos fazendo hemodiálise. E a vida só está melhorando, minha visão está voltando aos pouquinhos. Eu renasci de novo.
Do Rodrigo. Ligou para mim e disse, olha, a gente tem um provável coração para sua mãe. Você pode trazer ela? Eu disse, com certeza. Fiquei aliviado de saber que eu ainda iria poder ter ela.
Vamos continuar fazendo o esporte e vamos aí, torcida do esporte, vamos doar. Mas vamos tomar essa corrente, né? Não vamos mais parar.
Isn't that fantastic? If you want to share that with friends, YouTube Immortal Fans, you'll find it there. I said it said 51,000. The number is already over 60,000, and sport clubs in Barcelona and Paris have already inquired about this. But imagine, if college teams or football team or pro teams here did the same thing, how we could penetrate donor rates. But anyway, the point again, the larger point here is that if these are the stories in people's heads, the people we're trying to reach, we've got to give them new and more powerful stories that will break through and get them to do what it is we want them to do. And I'm not the only one saying this. Annette Simmons, in her outstanding book, says this. And please read that closely. What I'm not saying is that I'm not saying the facts don't matter. I'm not against evidence. I'm not saying you don't need the data. I am not, as my teenage daughter recently accused me, a data hater, okay? No. What I'm saying, what Annette is saying is that if you're trying to convince people, you've got to tell them a story first so that they'll look up from their iPhone, look up from their email. They'll stop, look, and listen and nod their head and go, yeah, that gets me, I got it. And then you present the data that makes the case. I think the 1-2 act of persuasion here is a story that helps to reframe it for them in a way they can accept, and the data that tells them that there is more than one story to be told here. So, that's why I say stories are the most powerful tool we have. They help us remember, they influence our generosity, they shape our beliefs every day. So, part 2, how do you tell a good story? Well, I want to show you a great example, and this comes from the issue of wind power. And think about something that's tough to tell a story about, because wind power, it's invisible, except for the windmills, of course, and its positive effects are the absence of a negative. So have fun telling a story about that, the absence of a negative. But I want to show you an organization, a company that found a way to do this. The company's name is Epuron, E-P-U-R-O-N. They're based in Hamburg, Germany. They do large-scale wind farms all around the world. And they did a commercial about wind power that managed to take this abstract thing and turn it into a human story that we can relate to. So let's take a look. Oh, by the way, I should warn you, it's a German company. The commercial you're about to see is in English, but the character who speaks throughout speaks with a heavy French accent. So heavy that in some rooms people have said to me, I could not understand what he was saying. So I created subtitles. So if you're having any trouble hearing, you can read it. It's called The Power of Wind.
I think I was always misunderstood. People just didn't seem to like me. I think I annoyed them. I got on their nerves. I don't know why. That's just the way it was. Yeah. Maybe intense. Maybe I came on too strong. I don't know. I really can't say. Yeah, it was lonely. Really lonely. But you get used to it after a while. And then, one day, everything changed. Somebody finally accepted me for what I am. Since I've got this job, life is completely different. I finally feel useful, good at something.
Isn't that great? So when someone comes up to us at a party or a business meeting or wherever and says, hey, I got a story for you, whether you know it or not, there are some questions in your mind that the story has to answer. And this spot does it beautifully. So let's take the questions in order. The first question is, who is this story about? Who am I following through the story? That's what people want to know when you tell them a story. Where's the human being I'm going to identify with? So in this story, who is this story about? The wind, right. The wind is our protagonist, our hero. And the next thing we want to know is, once we know who the story's about, we want to know, what do they want? What's their goal? What's driving the action in the story? What does the wind want? Right, to be useful, to have purpose. But what makes stories interesting is that we don't just get what we want, that something stands in our way, something that creates a barrier, an obstacle, that creates tension, conflict. And now we have to work through that. What's standing in the wind's way? He wants to be useful, accepted, but what stands in his way? He's annoying, right. Everything he does upsets people, and he doesn't understand why. Like the girl in the sandbox, he's like, why isn't she like this? I'm good at this, right? And so confronted with a barrier or obstacle, we have to do something. We have to come up with a strategy to solve that problem. And in this case, what does the wind do? Right, he makes a friend. He meets the man from Eperon. And the man from Eperon helps him. And in the end, what does the story mean? What is the deep human meaning in this story? It's a commercial for wind power, but what's the human meaning we can all relate to? Right, everybody seeks purpose. Everyone needs to be needed. So that's one of the reasons you enjoyed this commercial so much is not only because it's funny, but because it sits on this very powerful structure of storytelling that you're going to see again and again and again. Stories have to answer the question, who's it about? What do they want? What stands in their way that's going to make it interesting? How do we get past that barrier? And where do we end up? What's the ending and what does it mean? Now, I just want to skip ahead here for a second. Rob, can you take us to slide 63? 63. There we go. One more thing I want to say about what the structure of stories is, that there's an important distinction to be made here. In journalism, when they teach you how to tell a story, they teach you something called the inverted pyramid. And the idea of the inverted pyramid is, at that widest part, the top of the story, the first couple of graphs, tell people everything they need to know, right? Who, what, when, where, why. People are busy. They may only read the first couple of paragraphs, may only hear the first 20 seconds. So tell them right up front. And then, if they have more time, the less and less important details, because they may leave early, or you might have an editor who says, sorry, we don't have room for those last 3 inches, and they cut them off, and that's okay. You haven't lost anything important. Well, if your intent is to simply inform people quickly and concisely, this model is fine. But this is not what I'm talking about today. This is not the kinds of stories you need to tell if you're in the world-changing business. And in fact, for that, the model is the exact opposite. We need to tell stories where we start with just a few facts to introduce our characters and pull people in. But as we tell our story, we gradually add and widen and deepen until we've told the whole story. And our audience can't leave early. They got to stay to the end to find out what happened. And because they make that emotional investment, at the end of the story, they feel something. Oh, so that's what happened. I'm so happy for you. I'm so sad. Whatever, I'm feeling something. And if you're feeling something, then you're ready to do something. Emotions are the precursors to actions. If we don't feel, we don't do, right? So this is an important distinction. If you just want people to know, journalism is fine. But if you want them to do, to sign, to join, to give, to march, to change, then you're in the world of narrative storytelling, where you need a little more time and a little more engagement. And I want to underscore this with an example, because I teach this a lot. And a lot of people look back at me like you're looking back at me now and go, okay, I got it, that makes sense. But then I come back 6 months later, and they have defaulted right back to journalistic storytelling. And I want to show you an example from our community. And it's from the Nature Conservancy. Anybody here from the Nature Conservancy? No? Okay, then I can be really honest. Oh, there are? Could you leave the room? No. I met with their marketing and communications executives. I think it's about 150 people in Arlington, Virginia. Yes, they have 150 marketing and communications executives. And I taught this distinction. And they nodded their heads. Got it, got it. 6 months later, when I came back to look at their work, I said, how you doing, Nature Conservancy, with your narrative storytelling? And they said, we're doing great. Look at our website. Look at this page here. Inspiring Stories, our latest forest work. Now, the word inspiring would suggest to me that, you know, I'm going to be inspired, right? I'm going to feel something. So I said, great, which story should I click on? They said, click anywhere you like. I said, great, I'm going to click on tracking Florida bears, because I like bears. So I clicked on that link, and it took me to this page. And there's your inspiring story by Judy Althouse. Starts there under that box and goes on for about 1,000 words. But before they ask you to read the inspiring story, they want you to read the box with 3 bullet points. Because as we all know, inspiration starts with a box of bullet points. Seriously, they want you to read it first. Let me blow it up for you. Take a moment to read that, and then I've got 2 quick questions for you. The first question is, don't you love the idea of text messaging bears, right? Have located picnic basket. But the more important question, if you read these 3 bullets, are you going to read the whole story? Why not? Right. They've taken this notion of narrative storytelling, of this journey with a beginning, middle, and end, and they've given you the ending, told you how they got there, so now go on the magical journey. I don't think so. Good storytellers know not to do this. In Hollywood, where I live, the people who write the stories that we spend millions of dollars on every weekend, they know not to do this. When they put out their movie posters, they don't put that next to it. Has anybody not seen this movie? Because now you have. Rob, let's skip to slide 70, please. We're going to wrap up. I'm already late. 70, there you go. So, last piece, what kinds of stories should you be telling? Well, as I said, to prepare for this, for our meeting today, I asked Judy to send me some of the websites of some of the organizations in the room. Because, yeah, that's right, I hear people going, oh crap. Because there are opportunities to tell stories, and we're not taking advantage of all those opportunities. So let me show you some examples. And again, I hold these up not to criticize, but to say the opportunity is there. Alliance to Save Energy, are you here? I want to tell you something. That's beautiful timing. On your website, you do what a lot of people do, is you talk about your mission with bullet points. What I would like to do is see you tell stories of how you are advancing the mission. Every single bullet point could be a cue for a story of how we are advancing the mission. Not just bullet points, stories. Canoe, Canadian Network for Ocean Education. Are you here? What's that? So you do what a lot of people do, you list your goals. But again, a list of goals like that, I don't think is going to get anybody's heart racing, but if you can tell stories about making progress towards goals, let's blow one of them up there. You're helping to fill this void, you're helping to further ocean literacy in Canada. Tell me a story about how you're doing that. Show me what that looks like at ground level so I have a feeling for it, and now I have a feeling for your organization's work. Not just goals, stories of progress towards goals. How about the New Zealand Department of Conservation? Are you here? There you go. You do what a lot of people do. You have categories listing our work. Here's all these different categories. But you could take any one of them, like this one, and if you are doing, I can't read it. Oh, there you are. Managing threats to places and species, etc. Good. Tell me a story about that. This is another cue for a story. Earth Force, I know you're here. You do what a lot of people do is you talk about your impact, the difference you're making, but you express it in numbers. And any one of these numbers could be a story. 90% of students improved their problem-solving, decision-making, and civic action skills. Introduce me to one student, let me see her or him and how they are changed by your work. Now I have a feeling for it, and then the number starts to have more resonance. Mass Audubon. You do what a lot of people do. When you talk about your vision of the future, you have a vision statement, and there it is. And that's fine, but you could go further. Organizations that really want to give people a vision, take them into that world and tell them a story as if they're actually in that world. And I want to show you an example I stumbled across just this week. The Committee for Green Foothills in Northern California has a program where they have a projection 50 years out what their work will look like. And so they have this booklet, and here's one section about the Baylands area that they're working on, and if you blow it up, you can see there's actually a story where they envision walking through this area 50 years from now and what you would see. And if you're thinking, well, that's a story, Andy, but that's fiction. Let me tell you something. It's no more fictional than a strategic plan. Striving to improve stories are stories that say, you know, sometimes we fall short, but we always try to learn from our mistakes. And by sharing those stories of failure, let others learn from them. In the international development community, they have a fail fair in Washington, D.C. The United Way has something called a Fail Forward Fest, sharing stories of failure. We're seeing this more and more too. Learn from our mistakes. Let's be honest here. First-person storytelling. Project Learning Tree does this very nicely, where they have people tell stories of, here's the effect on me. Now we're doing it right. Are you here, Project Learning Tree? Good on you. This is what we're talking about. Stories where people are saying, this is the effect on me. And even our friends in government, at NOAA, the National Weather Service, telling stories. In this case, they have first-person stories about, I think this is actually about dealing with riptides and why you need to be careful. But first-person storytelling, very powerful. And if you want to go collect stories, you could take a lesson from the people at the Climate Stories Project. Are you here, Climate Stories Project? Okay, let's talk about them. Where do they get off? No. On their website, they solicit stories. What's your climate story? And they have very specific prompts to get people to tell a story in an interesting way. So these are all things that you can consider. I believe I am in overtime, Judy, so I don't know if we have time for questions. Yeah, I have one closing thought after this, but sorry, I cannot see a thing of these lights. So we talked about three things today. We talked about why storytelling is important. We talked briefly about how to tell a good story, and I showed some examples of where you could be telling stories. And let me do this, actually, because of the limitations of time here. I will be doing a book signing afterwards out in the hallway here. So if you have questions, come see me there. I'm not rushing off. I'd be happy to take your questions, but I want to get you out of here on time. A little bit of housekeeping and then one last thought. If you want to stay in touch, I do a monthly newsletter called Free Range Thinking, which is only about best practices in public interest communications. Case studies you should be aware of, books, resources, the kinds of things you just saw this morning. If you like this, if this was interesting to you, go to my website, thegoodmancenter.com, and go to the resources section. You can sign up for this newsletter. Just give us your email address. We will send it to you once a month, no cost, charge, or obligation, and no spam. We don't send anything else out, just this. And if you want to stay in touch between newsletters, I tweet under the name Goodman Center, so if I find a book, an article, something I think you should be aware of, I'll send you a tweet saying, hey, check this out, I think it would help you. So we can stay in touch that way too. I want to say thank you to Judy and her team for inviting me here. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I want to leave you with one last thought before I turn it back to Judy. In the long run, if you're in this business of changing the world, and again, I believe that's all of us, just remember this. Numbers are important, yes, but numbers by themselves tend to numb. It's right there in the word. And all that jargon we use, it just jars. And nobody ever marched on Washington because of a pie chart, I'm pretty sure. Stories are different. By their very nature, stories get stored in our brains. And so if in your work you can change the story in people's brains, you've taken the first step to changing the world. And if you will go forth after today and do that, I feel comfortable saying that for right now, for our story, we can close the curtain. But this is definitely not the end. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Thank you. Thank you very much.